Ladies and gentlemen, let me ask you a question that few dare to face. What if time was speaking but you weren't listening? What if your body began whispering what your spirit already knew, but no one around you had the wisdom to discern it? We were never created to die without purpose. We were never designed to fade away in confusion. And yet, every year, millions slip silently into eternity. And the signs were there all along. I'm not here today to scare you. I'm here to awaken you. Because when a person is about to cross the threshold of this life into the next, heaven and earth begin to echo with signals. But only those who are wise will hear them. Let me show you something that most people miss. When a person begins to approach the end of their earthly journey, whether they say it or not, whether they're fully conscious of it or not, something begins to shift. Not just in the body, but in the soul. Not just in the emotions, but in the realm of eternity. You begin to see something remarkable, something spiritual. They begin to release what they once clung to so tightly. Things that held meaning for years suddenly feel weightless. The house they built with their bare hands, the gold watch they protected like treasure, the land they fought legal battles for, now they're giving it all away. They say, give this to your cousin or I won't need that anymore. And you wonder, why now? Why let go after holding on so long? Because there comes a moment when the soul gets a signal. Heaven whispers, pack light, you're coming home. And when the spirit hears that sound, everything that once felt precious begins to lose its grip. That's not confusion. That's not aging. That's not forgetfulness. That's divine preparation. You see, in the realm of the spirit, there is something called eternal prioritization. It's the shift from what is temporary to what is timeless. The shift from ownership to release, from gathering to giving. And when the elderly begin to experience this shift, it is not something to ignore or explain away. It is a moment to honor, to observe, and to support. I remember sitting beside an elderly man, a former banker, wealthy, respected, honored. He leaned over to me and said, "Son, I've spent 40 years chasing numbers. I looked at my accounts yesterday and felt nothing. But when I watched my grandson take his first steps, that's when I cried." What changed? Not the man, not the money. The meaning changed. Because the soul knows when its season is reaching the finish line. And when it does, it starts shedding the weight. God never designed us to be buried under the pressure of things. We came into the world empty-handed, and we will leave the same way. But the wisdom lies in this. Some leave empty, others leave fulfilled. And the difference isn't what they had, it's what they let go of. You cannot walk into eternity carrying what was meant for time. That's why you must pay attention when the elderly stop arguing over inheritance and start blessing their children. That's why you should listen when they tell you to sell the land or give away the jewelry. They are not losing their mind, they are aligning their spirit. Even in Scripture, before Jacob died, what did he do? He gathered his sons, laid hands on them, and released what he carried. He wasn't focused on the sheep he owned or the wells he dug. He was releasing words that would shape nations. Because when your time is close, your legacy becomes louder than your property. We spend so much of our lives holding on, building walls, accumulating things. But when the spirit is nearing its final chapter, it stops building and starts bequeathing. It stops chasing and starts transferring. It begins to place value not on what was owned, but on what is left behind in the hearts of others. And so I say to you, don't wait until your bones are tired and your strength is gone to figure out what truly matters. Learn from the elderly, not just what they did, but how they let go. There's power in surrender. There's clarity in release. And sometimes it is not in the holding that we find peace, but in the letting go. So when you see them give things away, don't stop them. Don't argue. Don't panic. Stand still. Watch. Listen. Because you might just be witnessing the holy preparation of a soul that's almost ready to see the King. Let me tell you something that religion may not have taught you, but life eventually will. The soul remembers what the mind has forgotten. There is a sacred moment, often overlooked, when those nearing the end of their journey begin to speak with unusual clarity, not about politics or possessions, but about their own story. They start talking about events from 50, 60, even 70 years ago as though they happened yesterday. Names that were long erased from memory suddenly rise like fresh ink on an old scroll. Emotions, moments, regrets, gratitude, they flow out like a river that was dammed for decades. That is not coincidence. That is alignment. When the elderly begin to approach that final season, they don't just drift off quietly like a fading song. No, they begin to recall, to replay, to re-express, and if you are wise, you will pay attention. Because what's happening in that moment is not just nostalgia, it's divine administration. The soul is settling accounts. The spirit is reviewing its record before stepping into eternity's courtroom. I sat with a woman once, 89 years old, bedridden, but sharper than most people half her age. Out of nowhere, she began to talk about her neighbor from 1954, how she never apologized for something cruel she said. No one around her even knew that story, and with tears in her eyes, she whispered, "I wonder if she ever knew I forgave her." That is not weakness. That is not delirium. That is the heart reaching back to complete what was left undone. The spirit is never content with loose ends. It seeks closure. It seeks healing. It seeks to hand over a clean scroll to the one who authored it in the beginning. In those moments, they begin to confess not always sins, but weights. Things they carried silently for years, mistakes they buried, love they never expressed, pain they never processed. Why? Because they are approaching the border where truth cannot be silenced, where memory becomes testimony, and where heaven listens closely. We think aging is about losing memory, but when death draws near, the right memories return, not to torment, but to reconcile. The soul does not forget its story. It waits for the moment when it can tell it truthfully, free of pride, some will call it the life review, but I call it divine mercy. God in His grace gives us a final season to set things straight, not externally, but internally. And when you see your elders begin to speak about moments you thought were irrelevant, listen closely, because they're not just remembering, they're releasing. They're not just sharing, they're transferring wisdom. They're preparing their legacy not with wealth, but with truth. I once heard an old man whisper to his daughter, "I should have hugged you more." That one sentence held more weight than any inheritance. It was not money, it was not land, it was the raw, unedited confession of a man who wanted to leave nothing buried in the soil of silence. And this is why you must never rush them, never dismiss them. When they start telling stories, don't say, "You've told me this before." Say, "Tell me again," because each time they speak, their spirit is not just remembering, it's repairing. And some things that were broken in silence can only be mended in memory. And if you are young, listen even more, because the wisdom they release at the edge of eternity could save you years of wandering in circles. So when the elderly begin to remember, you begin to receive. When they start speaking, you start writing. Because there may never be a second chance to hear what only heaven and age can truly explain. This is not just memory, this is a sacred mirror. And what they say in their last season may be the clearest sermon of their life. There's a mystery that surrounds the final stages of life, a divine paradox that many see but few understand. It baffles doctors, surprises families, and often leaves loved ones clinging to a fragile hope. I've seen it too many times to ignore, and I've come to tell you that it is not science, it is spirit. It is not medical, it is spiritual alignment. There is a moment, sometimes just weeks or even days before death, when the elderly experience what seems like a miraculous return of strength, a surge of energy, a glow, a calm, a brightness in their eyes. And people say, maybe she's getting better. Maybe he's finally recovering. But what if I told you that is not always a recovery, it is a release? You see, the world teaches us to read the body, but only the kingdom trains us to read the spirit. And in the kingdom, every transition is preceded by preparation. When Elijah was about to be taken up, what happened? His steps became faster. His speech became clearer. He even tried to walk alone. Why? Because heaven was preparing the chariot, and his spirit already heard the sound of its wheels. That sudden clarity, that unexpected peace, that return of a smile after weeks of silence, it is not a fluke. It is not a delay. It is the mercy of God. It is the calm before crossing. It is the king allowing his servant to stand tall one more time before being carried home. I remember visiting a woman in hospice. She had not spoken for 3 days. Her children had flown in from out of town to say their goodbyes. Then one morning she sat up in bed, asked for her favorite soup, laughed with her grandson, and whispered to her daughter, "I feel light today." That evening, she passed in her sleep. And for years, that family asked, what happened? Was she really improving? No, she wasn't improving. She was ascending. Her spirit had already begun to walk the golden halls of eternity, and her body was just catching up. Sometimes, before a candle goes out, the flame rises one last time. That final flicker isn't a sign of survival, it's a sign of surrender. It is the soul standing in the doorway of two worlds, taking a deep breath before its final exhale. That's not something medicine can measure. That's not something charts can explain. That is sacred, that is spiritual, that is God. Don't misinterpret that moment. Don't let temporary strength distract you from eternal signals. Because sometimes the greatest clarity comes right before departure. And sometimes the ones we love are not being healed, they are being honored. That energy is not always for recovery, it's for reconciliation. It's heaven giving them time to speak one last blessing, to hold a hand, to make peace, to finish the chapter with dignity. If you ever witness it, don't be fooled. Don't get distracted by false hope or denial. Look deeper. Listen closer. That is eternity touching earth. That is the King escorting his beloved in gentle silence. Some leave this world crawling, others leave walking, but a few, those who are ready, they leave rising. And that, my friend, is not an end. That is the beginning. There is something deeply prophetic about silence. Not the kind of silence that comes from awkwardness or shyness, but the kind that descends when the spirit begins to detach from the noise of time and tune into the rhythm of eternity. You'll notice it if you're paying attention, not in hospitals or with machines buzzing, but in quiet homes, on old wooden porches, in simple rooms filled with sunlight and fading photos. The elderly begin to withdraw, not just from conversations, but from the world itself. Their appetite fades. Their excitement for daily things diminishes. Their schedule becomes simpler. Their words become fewer. And suddenly, the same people who once loved to talk about the news or fuss about bills or plan family events now sit quietly, watching the wind, staring out the window, as if waiting for someone you cannot see. But I tell you this, they are not withdrawing out of depression. No, they are leaning closer to where their spirit is already being drawn. This is not sorrow, this is sacred detachment. What you are witnessing is not the breakdown of personality, it is the ascension of awareness. The soul knows when time is closing. The spirit becomes still. The body becomes silent. And what once seemed important begins to lose its color. They are not giving up. They are letting go. I once watched a strong, proud old man, once a leader in his community, a man who spoke with power and walked with confidence, began to fall silent. He stopped picking up the phone. He stopped attending meetings. He began to sit in his garden every morning in the same chair, whispering to himself. I asked his daughter what he was doing. She said, I don't know. He just says he's listening now. And that pierced me, because sometimes the closer you get to the gates of eternity, the less you need to talk and the more you begin to listen to what God is saying, to what your soul is still holding, to what your life has really been about. There is a silence that speaks louder than words, a quiet that holds the wisdom of 1,000 sermons. We live in a world addicted to noise, but heaven speaks in stillness. But when you see your elders begin to retreat into quietness, don't assume they've lost interest in life. Don't try to force them to laugh again or keep them busy just to distract them. Maybe, just maybe, they've already heard something you haven't heard yet. A voice calling them home. And when they fall silent, you should start listening. There is a quiet mystery that begins to unfold in the hearts of the elderly when time is no longer measured in years but in moments. A divine stillness settles on them. But within that stillness, something begins to rise. A longing, not for another vacation, not for more money, not even for one more birthday celebration. What they begin to crave more than anything else is connection, deep, raw, heartfelt connection. And you'll notice it if you're present, if you're paying attention. They start asking questions they never asked before. Here's my sister. Can you bring my grandson to visit? Have I told you I love you? What's happening here? Their spirit is reaching for something eternal, because when the body begins to weaken, the soul begins to prioritize what truly matters: relationship. Not reputation, not achievement, relationship. You see, when a man or woman begins to sense that their time is drawing near. They no longer care about being right. They care about being reconciled. They don't care about winning the argument. They care about mending the bridge. Because deep in the soul, they know that no one crosses into eternity holding grudges. No one walks through heaven's gates carrying bitterness. The weight is too heavy. Only love travels light enough to make that journey. I remember a stern grandmother, known in her family for being distant, almost cold. But in the final month of her life, she asked for her estranged daughter, the same daughter she hadn't spoken to in over a decade. When they met, she didn't explain, she didn't defend, she simply cried and said, "I'm sorry I waited so long. I don't want to leave like this." That day, decades of silence melted in one embrace. That moment was more than emotional, it was eternal. Because reconciliation is a spiritual act. When death draws near, the spirit begins to pull toward restoration. They want to hear their loved ones' voices, not just out of emotion, but because love is the only language spoken in heaven. They want to give final blessings, not just as a tradition, but because there is divine weight behind the last words of the dying. And if you're wise, you'll recognize it. If you're spiritually aware, you won't brush off the phone call or ignore the strange request to see everyone together again. That is not nostalgia. That is heaven preparing a soul for peace. So when your elders begin to gather their family, to reconnect broken ties, to apologize, to forgive, to weep, don't rush them, don't silence them, don't stop them. Stand still, make room, let love finish its work. There comes a moment, unpredictable, unplanned, when the elderly stop resisting and begin releasing. And it is not weakness, it is not defeat, it is not despair, it is acceptance. Not the kind that bows down to sickness or gives in to age, but the kind that surrenders to eternity. You can see it in their eyes. The fight is over, not because they lost, but because they understand there's nothing left to prove. They're not clinging to life anymore. They're preparing for something greater. This release is spiritual. It is a sacred trust that says, my time has been spent, my assignment is ending, my spirit is ready. That is not fear, that is faith in motion. You will notice they begin to let go of things, not just material things, but emotional ones. Wounds they carried for decades, they finally let them drop. The bitterness they once protected like armor, they now lay down like old garments. Regrets that once screamed in the background suddenly grow quiet. Why? Because they are entering a space where only peace can dwell. They're stepping into the realm where God speaks louder than pain. I remember sitting by the bedside of an elderly man who once led thousands, a man who had built businesses, led campaigns, inspired crowds, and yet in his final hours, he held no microphone, wore no suit, had no audience. Just him, a quiet room, and a fading breath. He turned to me and said, "I've never felt more free than I do now." He said, "All that striving, all that proving, it doesn't matter anymore. I've found something better. Rest." That's what the world doesn't understand. In the kingdom, rest is not laziness, it's a reward. And when the elderly start detaching from roles, from schedules, from the busyness of life, it's not because they're giving up, it's because they're going home. And we must learn to respect that moment. Don't try to pull them back into this world when their spirit is already reaching for the next. Don't flood them with fear when they are surrounded by peace. That is holy ground. That is transition. That is a life concluding with grace. And hear me, when you see your elders begin to release, you should begin to remember. Remember what they taught. Remember what they overcame. Remember what they poured into you, because what they are handing over is not just memory, it is legacy. When the hand grows weak, the heart grows clear. And when the eyes begin to close, the spirit begins to rise. Let them go with honor. Let them go with gratitude. Let them go knowing they have finished their course and kept the faith, because when they release this life, they step into eternity's embrace. So what have we seen today? We've seen that the signs before death are not always signs of decline. They are signals from eternity. They are heaven's gentle whispers wrapped in earthly moments. Sudden energy is not always recovery, it's a glimpse of glory. Withdrawal is not isolation, it's preparation. Silence is not emptiness, it's the language of the soul. Reconnection is not nostalgia, it's reconciliation. And letting go is not giving up, it is the beginning of going home. Every one of us will walk this road, either with someone we love or eventually on our own. But the question is not if it will happen, the question is how will we honor it? Will we be too busy to notice the sacred in the ordinary? Will we let distractions blind us to the signs? Or will we open our eyes, slow our pace, and honor the last chapter as the most important one? Let me challenge you today. Do not wait until the end to start valuing what matters most. Don't wait for death to teach you how to live. Don't wait for the funeral to offer forgiveness. Don't wait for a final breath to recognize eternal truth. Because those nearing the end don't speak with noise, they speak with wisdom. Their words carry weight. Their silence carries messages. Their steps, even if slow, carry eternal echoes. So when that time comes, and it will, don't just watch. Don't just grieve. Learn, listen, love, and lead your life accordingly. Because every sign they show, every shift in their spirit, it's a sermon without a stage, and only the wise will understand it. Good luck on your journey. May you walk with eyes that see, hearts that feel, and spirits that discern. And when the time comes for you to be the one sitting in silence, may you have lived so well, so full, so righteously, that heaven will not need to call your name twice. Thank you for listening, thank you for caring, and thank you for being the kind of person who chooses not just to exist, but to understand.